Welcome to the Belonging Project podcast. This is Fiorenza and I'm your host. The purpose of this podcast is to bring voices together to talk about belonging. Through inspiring, real-life conversations, we explore how belonging can show up in so many different ways, what it feels like to belong, and the impact of truly belonging. Each episode will offer you inspiration and practical strategies to find your true voice in your life and as a leader. Let's dive in. Today I'm talking to Justin Reinert. He is the author of a book called Creating Belonging. Justin wrote this book in 2022. I'm so excited to be diving into it. Hi, Justin, and welcome on the Belonging Project podcast. Super excited to have you here today and talk about belonging together.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
In his book, Justin poses a model where belonging is created at the intersection of authenticity and acceptance. So it's when we as individuals can dig into self-awareness, then self-acceptance, and then we can present our authentic selves. And that, combined with radical acceptance of others, means that we don't have to approve or understand of others in order to accept them as human beings. I would love to get started with a little bit of an intro about you in your own words, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Justin Reinert. I have worked on my professional life. I've worked in corporate learning and development for 20 plus years. And have also, done a lot in the space of DEIB. I've worked for organizations large and small across the globe. And I think most relevant to this conversation, in 2022, I authored a book titled Creating Belonging, a practical guide to accelerate belonging in organizations and communities. And it describes how belonging is created at the intersection of authenticity and acceptance. And so have been working for the past couple of years, getting the word out about the book of Creating Belonging, but also my business, Performance Accelerated Learning. We help leaders build high-performing teams where everyone belongs. So really thinking about the intersection of leadership and belonging is some of the work that I do. And I have a feeling through our conversation we'll get into more of my history. So yeah, that's me for now.
Fantastic. So belonging has really been a thread for your work. One piece of feedback that I received from the podcast listeners is that hearing about experiences of belonging and not belonging really resonates. It's helpful, and at times it's been providing a sense of, I'm not alone in this. Someone else is going through this, and they've overcome it in this way. So I'm wondering, how does that look like for you? A situation, a time where you felt that you belonged, and a time where you felt that you didn't?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I can think in my background more times that I haven't belonged than than when I did belong. But I think, there's a stark example. And I want to share a story of kind of not belonging and then transitioning to belonging. And so I'll get to the when I did feel it. I often, when I talk about belonging and in my work, I actually once had a boss who told me to tame down the gay thing at work. And the thing is, I wasn't out at the time. And I didn't realize that I was out at work. And so we had a conversation and I said, look, if anybody thinks I'm gay, it's only because they, are making assumptions about my life, not because I've declared it. Yeah. And the thing is, I still felt like I needed to be more protective of myself. And so I kind of went deeper in the closet, if you will, and I started wearing a silver ring on my wedding ring finger just to kind of throw people off. At the time, marriage equality wasn't legal. And so, wanted to throw people off and make them think I was married to a woman. And so, yeah, I was definitely feeling like I needed to cover up, to mask that I wasn't necessarily in the right place. And what's interesting in that same organization, so this is when I worked for, I won't name them, but at the time, one of the largest global banks in the world, and I was working in kind of the branch system at the time in the States, and then I transitioned to a team when I moved to Chicago, and was working on a team that was doing leadership development. And what was interesting is like half the team, I think, was gay, gay and lesbian. And so it was the first time at work that there were others of me
Right.
where I felt like I belonged because I was represented in other people that were on the team. And so I could just be myself without really thinking about it. And so that's, I think, for me, when I belonged was when I felt there were other people that represented me within the organization. And that's a lot of the conversations I have around belonging have some of those themes where there's representation, where someone else shares some identity with me or with the individual, that they feel belonging. So there's a kind of before and after belonging story.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you found yourself working with people that were gay and or lesbian, how was it for you? Was there a connection? Was there a sense of belonging straight away?
Yeah, I mean, there were other reasons that it's interesting because it was my professional pedigree, I would say, did not match those of many on the team. And so that was another way that I didn't belong always. But
Mm,
there was something about the fact that in my personal life, it was just, it was a non-discussion item just
right,
because there were other people there.
right.
And so that's what I think made it comfortable because before, coming from an environment where I had worked with in that same time period, when I had my boss kind of call me out, I also worked in an office and I was in Iowa at the time. I was in Des Moines, Iowa. And the office that I worked in, there was a woman who was older than me, but probably not much older than I am now. And I remember her saying, I was out in that small office, but not when I traveled out, right? And so I remember her saying, "Oh, Justin's not really gay. Like he'll find a woman and he'll get married. He's too normal to be gay." And so, there were those kinds of experiences where in that small environment, I was someone else. I was othered.
Mm,
But moving to that team where there were other people like me, I could just be me. I don't know if that makes sense.
absolutely. How did you how did you decide to go into the learning and development space to deep dive more into belonging? How did that happen for you?
I would say that my primary focus was in learning and development. Many will remember the financial crisis of 2008, and they basically liquidated the team, got rid of everyone, and then went to an outsourcing model. So, after that, I did take some time. So I had, kind of made my way in the organization through promotions and new jobs to continue to grow in learning and development. And when I lost my job, I took some time to really think about, is this what I want to do? Like, do I need to take another path?
Mm,
And realize that this is where I belong. This is my purpose. And
mm,
so I started with another organization focused on sales training, which is kind of where I started my career in training and learning and development. Focused in sales training and then continued to grow a learning and development team, ultimately took on responsibility for all of HR. And so, given that I've had a role in learning and development and HR, DEIB just always falls on the shoulders of those folks, right? And given my identity as a gay man, was always interested in that. was always interested in diversity in organizations and how to promote it, how to make it work. And so, it's just always been a part of my toolkit, but not all that I am. And in 2021, actually, I had been, to talk a bit about the journey of how I've become more focused on it. I had written a few speaking proposals for a large LGBTQ work conference that were not accepted. But then in 2021, was having a conversation with an old colleague who said, "Hey, like, would you know anyone who would be interested in speaking to our LGBTQ ERG?" And I was like, "Of course, me. I would love to." And so I dug out that old speaking proposal and gave it some life and started working on this idea that I had around, at the time, it was really just thinking about authenticity and balancing authenticity for self to be kind of authentically out in the workplace, and also balancing that with, thinking about others and how we're impacting others. So as I was working on this, one night I woke up like 2 in the morning, as is way too often, and was thinking about it. And this idea just kind of popped in my head of, contextualizing these concepts into a model of authenticity. If we think of a Venn diagram of authenticity in one circle and acceptance of others in the other circle, and the overlap of those two things being belonging, that when we can be ourselves, this is moving into self awareness, self acceptance, really understanding who we are. And then at the same time, what the term that I've evolved to use, I call radical acceptance of others, meaning I don't have to understand you and I don't have to approve of you,
Right.
to accept that you deserve the same space that I do as a human being. And when we can have those two things in balance, so authenticity and acceptance, where those two things overlap is where belonging is created. And so I got up that night and just started writing, and I wrote definitions to the model. In fact, the definitions that I wrote that night are in the book today as they were written. And so that kind of launched the work of working on belonging. And so I published the book, and I've done several speaking engagements on the topic. And what I've come to find is that, and we can dig into the work as much as you want to, but what I've come to find is that people really find it a refreshing approach and a new approach to thinking about belonging in organizations or inclusion in organizations, or an approach to DEIB in organizations. So, so yeah, it's been a really fun journey, but that's kind of how I got to where I am today in working with belonging.
I love it. I love the model. I love the dimension of authenticity and acceptance, and how they can overlap, create that belonging. One thing that is coming to mind is, so in your work, how do you present the model to organizations, and how do you work with, let's say, leaders within an organization, where perhaps there is a problem around toxicity, right? Some leaders may not have the best behaviors. Maybe they have the authenticity, but maybe they don't have the acceptance, or at least they don't showcase it. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, this comes up a lot. And I think, where I start in the model, and where it's a bit different from some other work, is that it's all about that authenticity piece and digging into self-reflection. So if you pick up the book is a lot of self-reflection. Every chapter has questions at the end that are all about reflecting on yourself, understanding where you're at. And so the reason I start there is that a lot of this work often focuses on others. So what we're doing for others, how we're interacting with others. And there's a struggle there, because if we feel that we're excluded from the equation, then we don't opt ourselves in to do that work. And so when it comes to that kind of toxic behavior, it has to start with the individual and understanding where they're at and being intentional about who they want to be. There's a story that I often tell about authenticity and my definition of authenticity. There's an executive that I worked with in the past, and he didn't like this concept of authenticity. And he would say, if someone's an asshole, then they can just be authentically an asshole. And I was like, but that's not what authenticity is about. I don't think that anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be an asshole, right? And so when we think about toxic leaders, I don't think that toxic leaders wake up in the morning and say, how can I be awful to other people today? How can I destroy other people's lives today, right? That's not what they're saying when they wake up. They want to be successful. They're unintentionally doing things that are landing on other people wrong. So we start with ourselves and we understand who it is that we want to be, and making sure that we then are showing up in a way that is authentic and honoring who we want to be. And that's where we then transition into the acceptance. It's the others piece. So am I landing on other people in a way that I want to? Am I causing damage to others? And if I am, how do I shift that? Because that's not what I intend. Again, I'm sure there are very few people on this earth that do want to cause damage to others, but genuinely, most people don't. We don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be awful, right? And so it's really about thinking, how do I match my authenticity? How do I match who I am to be who I am with other people? And that's where we start with the work in it for me. And, when we're battling those things like toxic workplaces and toxic leadership.
So if I understand correctly, those leaders that you would typically be working with, they don't have the intention of, let's say, being an asshole. However, they may have received feedback that their behaviors isn't or aren't necessarily making others comfortable.
Yes.
Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay.
And so then we work on how do you match who you want to be the person that other people experience.
And in your work and your experience, self-reflection is a big step in getting that awareness and of course willingness to make that match who you want to be and actually who you are and how others are perceiving you. What else could be helpful for those leaders beyond self-awareness and self-reflection?
Yeah, I think so. When we start with self, and then in the acceptance side, it's really, I think what can be helpful is understanding others' perspectives. So in the model, when we talk about we take the Venn diagram and we kind of blow that out into a quadrant model. So in the quadrant, when we're high on authenticity but we're low on acceptance, is what I call overbearing. And so that's where we assume that other people's values match ours. Yeah. We impose our values on others. And that's just not that, other people's values don't match ours. And so after we've done that self-acceptance, the self-reflection, we understand who we are. The next important piece is to try to expand our worldview of other people and understanding other views, other people's values in a way that we can honor them. And it doesn't mean that we have to adopt them, but we have to respect them and respect that others have different values or perspectives than we do. It's an overbearing where we impose our values on others. But when we're in belonging, we can hold on to our values and our authenticity, but also understand that our values are not other people's values. In the work, I talk a lot about my experience growing up. So I grew up in rural Iowa, so middle of America, and most everyone that I grew up with looked like me, right? And, everyone was, some version of Protestant, from the Catholic Church to the Baptist Church to the Methodist Church, right? That to me was religious diversity. But when we look across the globe, there's actually much more. And so as I grew up and then moved to bigger and bigger cities, I started to understand my worldview was much smaller than what I thought when I was growing up. And so it's just that it's expanding our worldview to understand how many other perspectives there are, and that we can honor others' perspectives and values without imposing our own. And that's, I think, an important piece of, you know, not just understanding ourselves, but expanding our worldview to know that there are others out there that are different, and that's okay.
Mm. There's something that's coming up for me as you shared this. I've recently worked with a leader that had an opportunity to go through some reverse mentoring in their organization. And so there the angle was really about understanding other generations and perhaps different values. And it was just incredible how having that space, which was actually, well, in that example, outside of their own team, but just the open, safe space that it allowed that leader to immerse in, and how much sharing of the different set of values for both individuals there was in that partnership. So yeah, that really resonated when you mentioned looking at someone else's values and really trying to understand their viewpoint, where they're coming from, and so on.
Yeah. And we do that. What helps is just connecting with others and trying to get to know others. I apologize. I'm going to mess up this quote, but I think Brene Brown has this quote that it's something to the effect of, "It's hard to hate people close up,"
Mm.
something like that. I need to go back and find the quote and remember it. But it's just that, like, when we're distant from others, when we're not connected with others, it's really easy to dislike them. But the closer we get to people, and even people that are different from us, it's hard to hate them. It's hard to dislike them because we're wired to connect with other people. Biologically, as humans, we need to connect with others. And so when we can make a connection with someone else, it's hard to, even if they have different values, it's hard to dislike them. And so for me, it's all about leaning in and just trying to get to know other people and connect with new people, connect with people that aren't like me.
Mhm. I'm curious about whether you've experienced any aha moment, any light bulb moment when you worked with people through your model and you've guided them through the self reflection. Any example that you could share with us?
I'm trying to think of like one big moment. There's so many small moments. I've have so many conversations with folks around the creating belonging model, and when they felt it or when they haven't. But I think what's most enlightening to me, yeah, the thing that's coming up for me, I think in my experience of growing up, I'm a white male. I grew up in rural Iowa. Most people looked like me. And so I have all of the privileges that come with that. And then in my 20s, starting to think about and accept my gay identity, I then adopted this, like, well, I'm marginalized too. I'm gay, so I'm marginalized. I'm just as marginalized as anyone else who's marginalized. And I held on to that pretty strong for a long time. And it took me a while to finally let go and understand, look, while I'm a gay male, I'm also a white male. And I have all the privilege that comes along with that. And so understanding that positionality in society, and then contrasting that with some of the conversations that I have with, for example, some of the conversations that come up the most in my mind right now are just with women, and understanding the expectations that are put on women of who they're supposed to be. So juxtaposing that with authenticity, right?
Mm.
I in my white male privilege can much easier lean into my authenticity because of that privilege, right?
Yeah.
And for women, so many conversations that I have, they're not being authentic because of the expectations that are put on them by their
Mm.
families, by their parents, by society of who they're supposed to be. And so that's been just very enlightening to understand that and, the pressure that comes along with that. And I'm not, I don't want to make light of anything, or I'm not trying to say yay, I have privilege. I'm just trying to acknowledge the reality of what is. And it helps me understand the world a little bit better when I can think about, what that means for others that don't have it.
Yeah. And that is quite spot on. It really resonates with me. There is so much expectations, so societal expectations, family expectations, you can name it, that is
Mhm.
placed on women, and that could definitely be inhibitive of showing who you really are, your actual strengths, and not the one that you're supposed to do, or that you've kind of worked through because of work, as an example.
Yeah. There was a conversation, and it was so I also have a podcast, and there was a conversation that I had of a woman who was telling her experience of growing up and the expectations that her mother put on her. And there's this conflicting view of you need to be attractive to men, but don't be too promiscuous, right? Be attractive to men, but also it's your fault if they desire you too much,
Mm.
right? And how do you find that balance? And it's so tough. And that's something that, I would say some of those aha moments, seeing the world through that lens that I just can't identify with, right? That's not something that was programmed into me, or, for me, or expectation of me. And, it's unfortunate that that exists.
Yeah, for sure. So, from what I'm hearing, the model, that you have developed could actually be applied, could be helpful in different settings. Such a wide, spectrum, actually, for it. What has been, would you say, perhaps the way that it resonated with someone, that surprised you and you were like, wow, this is crazy, amazingly cool?
Um, Two thoughts are coming to mind. One, I want to pick up on the context of, it can be applied anywhere. There's in the book, I talk about this definition of community, and the way that I define community is, any group of people that come together for a single or more purposes, or at least one purpose. And so we operate in many communities every day,
Mhm.
right? We have a family, maybe we live with people. We have a group of friends. We may have multiple groups of friends that all have maybe some different interests. We have work. Maybe we have a nonprofit. Maybe we have, affiliation with faith, that we participate in. And so we have all these communities that we're operating in every day, and we can be in different states of belonging in all of them. And it's very fluid. We could go from being in belonging in one place and then be in recluse in another place. And so we operate and move fluidly, and even within one community. Like one day at work, we could be in a really great place of belonging. And then the next day, somebody does something that just knocks us out right into a place of minimizing. So, yes, it can be applied in lots of settings. And there was one, the second thing I wanted to share is when you asked, what was that one thing that just really kind of surprised you? I was doing a speaking engagement last summer, and with a group of learning and development practitioners. And one of my participants was talking about, how, we do this work in learning and development. There's some element of DEIB that we probably lean into at some point. And this woman was talking about this moment that she had. And it was an aha moment for me, like knock on effect of her aha moment, because she was talking about how she was in a classroom with, doing some DEIB work, and she was teaching a class, and this 23-year-old male spoke up and spoke to the fact that he was a widower and, had lost his wife at a very early age. And it hit her that she was also, she's a widow, but an older woman, and she would never speak about it because she didn't want to make other people feel bad, or she didn't want to introduce that topic of conversation. She didn't want people to have to, oh, I'm so sorry, right? And for her to see this 23-year-old speak up, 23-year-old male speak up about it, it made her realize, like, actually, I can own that. That is something that I can speak about. I shouldn't feel guilty for owning my own lived experience, right? And so she started to lean into that in thinking about, again, that balance of authenticity and acceptance. When we hide those things, it's what I call we're in minimizing, where we're making ourselves into someone that other people are comfortable with. But in that process, we make ourselves less than. We make ourselves not ourselves. And so being able to lean into that authenticity, and again, when your authenticity tramples on someone else, does harm to someone else, that's not good. But when we're authentically ourselves with something like, I'm a widow, I'm personally not, but when someone can say that and own that, I think that's empowering for us to be able to own those things in our lives. So that was a moment for me that was powerful, to have that conversation and understand that, I had helped someone kind of have that aha moment.
So powerful. And it must have also been, what comes to mind is the word liberating. It must have felt liberating as well for that individual to be able to
Yes.
be okay with owning that space, that big side of themselves, right? That I guess with um, that part of their identity.
Yes. Yes. I hope it was. I haven't had a follow-up conversation with her. But I hope it was, and I would assume it would be. I mean, when we can lean into our authenticity and be who we truly are, admit who we are, there is something that's liberating about that.
Yeah. I really love how you define community, how you defined it for us earlier, and how you define it in your book. The idea that actually you belong to several communities all the time, right? That kind of takes up the pressure a little bit as well. You often find a lot of conversation around, finding your tribe, finding your people, your community, used in a singular way. And acknowledging that actually they're, probably aligned with all the things that define you, or, all the things that are part of your identity. In the same way, you can happily belong to several communities. Completely resonate with that. And I think it helped me when I realized this. Perhaps going back to the fact that I don't have siblings, the no sibling syndrome, and, kind of wanting to find that community growing up. I don't know. Actually, yes, it was very helpful for me to embrace the fact that you may have several interests that don't necessarily have an intersection point, and it's okay to then belong to different groups of people. Is that something that you find people struggling or feeling challenged with a lot in your work?
There's definitely, I've had a lot of conversations with folks who find that moment when they find their people or
Mm.
their tribe,
Yeah.
and how empowering that is, or how relieving it is to say, like, oh, there's other people like me,
Mm.
and then to find there's a bit of validation in that. In so many conversations, the concept of representation has come up a lot, and so I'm continuing to dig into that, of the role of there's this two-sided coin of authenticity and representation that helps everyone. And I don't know if this makes sense, but the way that I think about it is, speaking from my own experience, when I as a gay man can speak up and be out and not loud, right? But like be who I am and not be shy about the fact that I'm a gay man. That, I hope, gives inspiration to others, gives a sign to others that it's okay. Like if you are as well, you can be out and you can be successful and you can be in this world, right? So when we see ourselves represented in others, it gives us a sign that we can also be that person. And so I have so many conversations about representation and the power of representation, and it is this knock-on effect that authenticity breeds more authenticity. That when I can be out about something that is, potentially commonly frowned upon or frowned upon in some groups, when I can be out about that gives others a sign that they can be too. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. So what's your next step? Is there any part 2 of the book coming up? What are you up to now? Big project?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on the second edition of the book. So in my work in learning development, I've always been very iterative. So I just expect that there's going to be a version 2 and a version 3, and we're just going to keep building and growing. And so when I released the book, I knew it wasn't done, but I knew it was like the 1.0. And so I'm right now working on the second edition of the book. I'm deepening the research. There's, as I said, I'm deepening the research in concepts of authenticity, representation, and then also exploring, right now the book is very much kind of individuals, teams, like one group perspective. And so I'm looking at concepts of creating belonging as a leader. So not only do I create belonging for myself and my team, but as a leader, I have an additional layer of responsibility. And then creating belonging for organizations. So maybe I have a larger responsibility. I'm the CEO of an organization, and I need to make sure that I'm creating belonging in that organization. So I'm exploring those themes. And then also adding additional stories. So the book was the first edition of the book was very much written through my lens and stories told from my perspective. And so the second edition, we're adding in stories from other people so that we can hear others' voices in the work and some of their experiences and their ways of not having belonging or finding belonging. So I'm really excited about that. I don't have an official publication date, but it will be 2024. So be on the lookout for that. That's kind of the biggest thing on the horizon. And then also, as your podcast listeners may listen to other podcasts, I also have the second edition of my Creating Belonging podcast that I will be releasing very, very soon. So that's coming out. I've been working on that. And then, just continuing to do the work, speaking, engaging with other organizations and helping them create belonging.
Amazing. We will be linking in the episode notes your book and your podcast so that people could also tune into that. Thank you so much, Justin, for your time. Really appreciated this conversation with you today.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin. You can follow the podcast on LinkedIn at the Belonging Project Podcast. You can also hit subscribe and stay up to date with our episodes. And do feel free to get in touch with me on coaching@fiorenzarossini.com. Thank you again and see you next time.